Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah and welcome to Pivot on Hilal TV. With me today, a very special guest, David Forbes. David Forbes is a creative media specialist with wide global experience in writing and editing photography, cinematography, and filmmaking, historical and archival research, and a social activism project which includes management and printmaking. So, with a strong human rights and cultural activist background since 1977, David has set up and run a trade union, written and run training courses, and worked with progressive organizations, all the while making his own films and fighting cancer. During his 37 years in the media and TV industry, he facilitated shoots across the world, working in 34 countries for most of the world's major TV stations, and winning awards for both his films and his photography. He's best known for his award-winning film, The Craddock Four, about anti-apartheid activists murdered in 1985. And I think that it is appropriate to begin this series with a conversation with David because it shows a particular trajectory, how individuals involved in apartheid today can stand up and identify the similarities in what we see in Israel-Palestine and identify with and are strong voices about the genocide in Gaza. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much, David, for joining me and for making this time.
Sure, thank you.
David, you have a wonderful history, and that history touches on the humanity of South Africans, because that's where your passion was, that's where your focus was. And recognizing the humanity of South Africans allows you to recognize the humanity of the Palestinians. It's a parallel story. Right? But for you, it goes deeper than that. I mean, a white South African, always considered as a person of individual privilege, yet you transcended that boundary already very many years ago, before it became fashionable to be an anti-apartheid activist or to become an anti-racist activist, etc. You know, what brought you to this particular standpoint, and how do you then see what is unfolding in Gaza compared to what you saw, what was unfolding in South Africa in the early 70s, 80s, and 90s?
Okay, well, there's about 14 questions in there, but let me start by saying that my mother brought me up the right way, and my father too, you know, so respect for women, everyone's equal. All of these things were drummed into me as I grew up. Then the two sort of key things that altered my perception of the narrative that we live in here was, first of all, going to Russia in 2012 because my film was being screened there, the Craddock Four, and I was invited there. So I went there, and before I went, I thought, you know, I need to know something about Russia and whatever before I go. And so I began to do research on it. And I discovered that, you know, well, I'd always known that the whole like red under the bed and die swart gevaar and all that stuff was rubbish. But, you know, I saw a different side to the Western story about Russia. I saw that Russia had helped many non-aligned or African countries with agricultural know-how, with building dams, with, you know, with a whole range of things that weren't related to arms and war and, you know, being the big bad bear, right? So, you know, that was really a big game changer because it just really forced me to look at the world in a different way. And the second thing was working in a lot of Muslim countries. You know, I've worked in Saudi Arabia, for example. I was there for a month during Ramadan. So it was very tricky working there then because I was also filming all the airports. So we were going from the runway to the other, back and forth with all the X-ray machines and the bureaucracy and the security and everything. We had to do all of that. And, I've also worked in Afghanistan, I've worked in Egypt, I've worked in Somalia, I've worked in Côte d'Ivoire, northern Côte d'Ivoire, I've worked in Mali, I've been to, worked in Senegal and Ghana, where there are Muslims as well. And so I have actually developed I don't see Islam or Muslims as a threat. They're just people like I am. And, I think the difficulty with the West is that they think they're better than everyone else. There's this thing about white exceptionalism, which is rubbish because, our blood is the same color. And so, my whole being always has been this thing of we are all equal and we are all the same and everyone must be treated the same way in a just and fair way. And so that's always been a passion of mine. It's been a guiding principle,
So, but I think you touched on something very important, fundamental, and that is even after 9/11, the question that kept on going out is that you are becoming Islamophobic or you're manifesting Islamophobic tendencies. This was the general comment put out to the world and to Americans per se. But have you met a Muslim? Have you engaged with or shared a conversation with a Muslim? And then you can know, and then you can comment about. So this ability within the West to compartmentalize us, to put us into different little boxes and then label us according to their particular agendas is significant in that it succeeds very well then in dehumanizing us, because the minute people interact and they engage with each other, they notice something different. And we saw this in South Africa during the floods. And also during the 8 days of violence, when people came together, communities came together for the first time, they were encountering each other simply as human beings, and they realized that, no, we're all the same, and we are wonderful people. I mean, South Africans are amazing. So in your experience now, you say that your entire encounter with the realization of white exceptionalism, but it's not only white exceptionalism, it's Western exceptionalism as well. And it is rooted in this very fundamental ideology of liberalism, which puts forward a false kind of an image of this very progressive, kind of an ideology of progressive people. And in South Africa, we have the white liberals as well. We know who they are and what they tout and espouse and the trouble that they make. But how do you link all of this to what you see in Palestine and Gaza unfolding?
Well, look, what's happening in Gaza is unspeakable. It is quite clear to anyone whose eyes are open and whose ears are open that there is a genocide going on there. And, the ICJ judgment basically admits that. And I think that's a step forward, not a big one, but it is a step forward. But, the thing is that from a young age, I always mixed with other race groups or whatever. I mean, I remember at school on a Christian camp, we went to the Transkei to a small place called Tlantani, where we were building a hall for them. So digging holes, gum poles, cement, all of that stuff. But every evening we would go out to the huts, and there would be these huts dimly lit with a little fire in the middle, lots of smoke, your eyes burning, whatever. And you'd see these old people with, lots of wrinkles, but they just had such beautiful faces. And then, they would sing for us. So there were, a whole lot of people from that kraal would sing for us. And the stars, just millions of stars up there because it's dark. And, that just said, you're an African and you love this place. And, so that was like the start of it. Now, under apartheid, we could see, like right away, that this was not a good system, and it wasn't working for most of the people, and it was brutal. I mean, I was picked up by the security branch, and when they arrive at your door, and the man who says, will you come with us, please, is one of the most notorious murderers in the Eastern Cape, Gideon Nieuwoud. You don't know if you're going for an hour, a day, a week, 6 months, a year, forever. You might die there. Many did. And so, that was, and then we just used to get harassed too. And so I became more enmeshed with the progressives, and I was asked to join the ANC. But I had an issue with the ANC, which was this democratic centralism idea. And I said, well, I think that's nonsense. If we are here on the ground, we should be making the decisions about what we do, not the movement will decide, the leadership will decide. You see, for me, democracy starts on the ground.
Okay, I have to pause you there.
Okay.
We have to go to a break, and when we come back, then you can continue this.
Sure.
But we'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Pivot. Today on Hilal, and with me the very special guest is David Forbes. We're talking about David's work, his activism, and of course his whole upbringing that brought him to this point where today David is one of the loudest voices in South Africa as well in speaking out against genocide in Gaza. David, you spoke about your childhood and and your upbringing, the influence of your family, and that whole point about democracy. So tell us a little bit about how you see democracy, liberalism, and link that to history to bring a full context to what we're seeing today.
Okay, so the narrative that we get mainly here in South Africa is the Western narrative, which was dominated by American media, British media, CNN, BBC, whatever. I began to disbelieve BBC and stop watching CNN with the first Gulf War when their reporters were embedded. I was like, no, man, this is not cool. Because, in Vietnam, you did actually find people who would report properly on what was happening. But no more. War is, the media around war is so controlled now that it becomes almost impossible to see and find out what is happening. And, in war, the first casualty is truth. And each side will indulge in as much propaganda as they can, but ordinary people just don't seem to realize that. And they gulp it down, they just eat it all the time, and they don't think for themselves, because we've got into a culture which is promoted by capitalism and by liberalism, which is just there to destroy any other alternative view. So, if you look at history, in 1917 with the Russian Revolution, it was something that had to be smashed immediately. I mean, you can't have this other ideology. We have to have the free market. We have to have, all these things that, less government regulation so that we can be thieves as much as we like. Well, that was, So, I mean, even with that, I mean, Churchill, Winston Churchill, Sir Winston Churchill, the man who saved Britain in the Second World War, was an out-and-out racist, misogynist. He was like anti-Semite. He was anti-communist. He was a very, very nasty man. And, I have some quotes here. I mean, he's been described as having blood dripping from his mouth.
Which can be said today of both Biden and Netanyahu, Blinken, all of them
Exactly the same.
Yes.
Genocide Joe. He's right up there with them, with the war criminals like Bush and Tony Blair and Cameron and all of them. They are not leaders. They are warmongers. And the whole thing behind liberalism is this concept of democracy. Now, democracy has been defined. It's been defined as by the Merriam-Webster dictionary, government by the people, especially the rule of the majority, or a government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or indirectly through blah, 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 free elections.
That doesn't really exist today, because if you look at it...
That's what democracy is. Do you see it anywhere in the world?
No,
I mean,
not.
in America, we've got two center-right parties or two right-wing parties squabbling with each other over, should Israel get this aid, should Ukraine get that aid, and how do we stop these damn immigrants coming in over the border? I mean, governments these days, no one can become the president of the United States without being vetted by big business.
It's ultimately about the corporatocracies. It's the corporates that rule the governments. But David, many of us, we've been having these conversations for many years, right? We know this. If you come into journalism and you're in the journalistic field and you've been in journalism for many, many years, it is expected that you know a certain amount about the international system, about how the world runs. How do you see journalism in South Africa, and why did it take SANAF so long to make a comment about the Gaza genocide? Why is it that only now, a few days ago, that we had journalists of South Africa coming together to have a vigil for the journalists that died in Gaza?
I was there at that vigil, and I saw, I think, only two journalists that I recognized from my cohort, as it were. But of course, some of them have died. Not in a war, though. They haven't been murdered by the Israelis in direct strikes on them or shot by snipers. But, the South African journalism was a mimic of Western journalism. Okay, it was always fed by Reuters, UPR, and AP in the old days, like Associated Press, Reuters, and UPR International, and there was SAPA as well, and all of those were white-run Western European organizations, and the media was owned by white business. Okay, so for instance, the Rand Daily Mail, where I began working after my like journalism degree, was the most left-wing of them all, but really in terms of the spectrum, it was pretty center-right. But even there, I mean, there were over 100 laws that stopped what you could write. And, people still tried to tell both sides of the story, but not anymore. Now, and especially with social media, we've actually found an inversion of the whole thing where you can probably find out more of the truth on social media than you can in the mass media.
So do you think there's any journalists of credibility in South Africa?
Any. There are a few, but, that's a very complicated question because there are some journalists like that, but many of them sort of are like that, but they're still captured in a large way. And so that's why SANAF, delayed everything for so long until they were actually forced to make a statement. And what forced them to make the statement was the ICJ judgment, which basically said there's genocide happening. People, you'd all better flip-flop your position, and now you support South Africa. So, but I mean, I know my own freelance career has sort of petered out for a number of reasons. One of them is the lack of funding, and mass media gradually been strangled by social media, as it were. People just aren't buying or subscribing to mass media because it's not actually credible anymore. It just punts one narrative, and that's not the narrative that we know is out there. That's not reality.
So now, would you say that, we're in an age where the young people are in control? They're in control of what they want to see and what they want to hear, and they're quite astute to recognize that there's big problems with mass media. And so, we have just 2 minutes to wrap up. I would like you very quickly to say, is the future then? Understanding the way in which young people interact with the media, and how can you then bring something like the Cradock 4 to the young people to make them understand what the past was and how it's manifesting in the present?
Okay, I think that what we're seeing in the world is a massive shift in consciousness. And it's just starting now. It's growing in momentum every day. I think we are seeing the rapid and steep decline of the American empire, of the West. I mean, the EU also, on the way down, and they've got troubles ahead of them that they haven't even imagined yet. So, and on the other side, we've got BRICS and the global South and China and Russia actually, coming up, and they are not at this point looking like imperialist warmongers. Anyway, that's a discussion for another day. But I think the youth really want something different. I think they've lost trust in authority. And that's a global phenomenon. Everywhere people are saying, this government, I mean, really, this is not on. I mean, in Germany, in Britain, okay, Britain is supporting Israel. They are supplying them with arms, and they want to put troops in, and, they're supporting Ukraine and everything. And there's a march in London that is not reported by the mass media of more than 500,000 people in London, right, saying no to genocide, but it's not reported. And so young people are saying this old system must be consigned to the dustbin of history, and hopefully that includes capitalism, because if we don't create a new system that is humane and human-oriented rather than technology, we're doomed.
I have to stop you there.
I know.
We're at the end, but thank you very much. That was a very powerful conclusion. Certainly, we have to create a new way, and that new way must include the way in which we see the youth and focus on humanity.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, David, for being
Sure,
here with
thank
me and
you.
for sharing your ideas. Fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.